Um, so today, we are very, very excited to have Reid. I hope I'm saying your name right.
Yes, you are.
To
You're getting it totally right. It's just like reading a book.
Okay, awesome. We are very excited to have Reid on London Power BI user group. This is the very first time we have Reid on the Power BI user group, and he's speaking all the way from the Seattle, from the mothership. Well, not from the mothership, but like where the mothership is. And Reid is going to talk about unlocking the new visualizations and features in Power BI. So before I actually give it to Reid, I have to say is like I watched your YouTube videos, some of your YouTube videos, and they are really nice. And it's like every time I watch it, it's kind of gives me a kick in the back. It's like when am I going to launch it? But it's never ever. I'm procrastinating forever. But everyone who are attendees, please do check out Reid's YouTube. It's like a really nice information, tips and tricks, and it's really good. So before we give start the main session of just few things, we will be recording the session. The recording will be available. We will publish the slides as soon as we get them. And if you can't use the chat window, please use the raise hand option, and we will unmute you so that you can ask your questions whenever Reid is happy to answer the questions. And following this session, we have, I'm going to post the link. We have the Thank You Power BI 5 years event happening. So we will be closing the session sharp like in an hour ish. But if you have any questions, we'll find another way to approach you or answer your questions and things like whatever convenient for you. So that's all from me. And thank you so much again, Reid, for coming and speaking for us. And I'm going to stop and mute myself, and it's all yours.
All right, perfect. Just to double check, can everybody hear me?
Yeah, we still hear you.
Yes.
Okay,
yeah.
Great. Just making sure. Sometimes they get like a minute into it and they're like, oh, we can't hear you yet. All right, so let me go ahead and share my screen. There you go. Let me know when you can see it.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. So just a little bit of logistics before we actually get into it. What I'm going to be doing is over the next 45 minutes or so, talking about some cool topics and conversations around unlocking visualizations and features in Power BI with some clever tricks and techniques. But at the end of each section, I'm going to have a little kind of a comment and question section, a time where I just kind of hold the airspace for people to be able to ask those. So my general recommendation, for those who at least can get the chat window to work, typically if that's working for everyone, as the questions come up in your head, just go ahead and type those in. And then what I'll have is either of the moderators, I'll have them help me basically read back those questions during that portion. That way the questions will already be ready and I'll answer them as I'm able to for just a few minutes between each of those. If we are having issues with the chat window as well, we can certainly just unmute you and have you ask that way. But I'll save a couple of minutes between each of those and then a big block of time at the end as well for just general questions. But yeah, overall, I just want to give a little bit of background around me. So let me actually do that. For those of you less familiar, my name is Reid Havens. I've been in the industry now for about 7 years doing data analytics. I've owned my own business for the last 5 and have been working full time for it for Havens Consulting now or for the last about 2 to 3 years, and do a lot of stuff with Power BI, everything from modeling to the front end. I would say the specialty that I've kind of found myself falling into has really been related to aesthetics and some of the storytelling aspects of it. I think there's a lot of Power BI reports out there, many of them with good data models, but a lot of them fall short a little bit in either kind of how they look aesthetically or the way the information is conveyed, which isn't really telling like a super impactful story. So that's kind of where I just leaned on as my my specialty that people often find me by. But I do a lot of stuff with that, and thankfully and gracefully, I've now been given the MVP award for the last 3 years. I just got my latest chip for my little MVP trophy only a couple of days ago in the mail. So that was kind of a nice highlight to my week. All right, let's talk about what we'll be going over. So the thing that I love about this presentation is this is kind of like the core thing that I like to introduce user groups to as a great example of the stuff that I do. And because it's so modular, as you can see, it actually is a ever-changing presentation. So if you saw this again in a year, there's a good chance 50 to 70% of the material in here will be new because I do a YouTube video actually every week on tips and tricks and techniques in Power BI and just things that as I'm developing or as I'm teaching, I discover and find, fun new ways to use the tool. So basically these things get hot swapped out throughout the year as I find newer and cooler stuff to do. And it's scalable up to, an hour and a half down to about 45 minutes. So we'll basically be going through left to right. We're going to hit most of the stuff over on the left side for the new native visualizations and features. We might get a chance to cover some of the stuff over in layered and custom. But the nice thing is a lot of these also have supporting videos that I will link you to as well. So even if we don't get to cover it in person, we will get a chance. I will get a chance to provide you a lot of additional links and resources at the end of the presentation as well. All right. Oh, and with that, I'm going to go ahead and start to the demo. And that will be the links that you'll see at the end. Let's get this up. And some of these things are using a single visual. Some of these will be using layered, but with each one of these will be a kind of a little tool that you get a, yes.
Sorry, just to interrupt you, we can just see your PowerPoint window, not anything else.
Thought I shared the right screen. Let's try that one more time. Stop sharing, start sharing. Let me know if you can see the Power BI desktop.
Just waiting for it to come up.
Yep. So hopefully it pops up. Usually doesn't take that long. Nothing yet?
Nothing yet.
All right, I might need to share them individually. Let's try that again. So stop sharing, share, and maybe if I share the individual, I'll do a screen one more time, then I'll try sharing the individual application. Let's see.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. Don't be grumpy. Oh, interesting. Now it's actually like, even though I click start sharing, it doesn't actually confirm it. I guess it still gives me the option to share each time. All right, let's try individual application. Not doing it. Worst case, I guess I can call out and then call back in and see if that fixes it in Teams, because it doesn't actually seem to be now like actually enabling sharing each time I attempt it.
Sure, your video's frozen as well, so there's something not right.
Okay. All right, interesting. Yeah, let me just hang up and then call back.
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
Teams gremlins kicking in.
Yeah.
Hopefully, this is where we need a holding page, isn't it?
Exactly. Well, something to learn from them.
I'll tell you what. While we're waiting for Reid to delve back in, I'll talk a little bit about next month's
session.
event.
Yes, exactly. I totally forgot about it. Yeah, go on.
So we're super excited that next month we've got Josh Kaplan, who used to be part of the Power BI program team over in Seattle. He's since moved roles and has joined the Azure Synapse Analytics team. So he is going to join us next month to do a session on all the exciting new capabilities that Azure Synapse brings. So we're very much looking forward to that.
Yeah.
All right, let's try a second time as a charm. Fingers crossed. Working?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, just a Teams thing. Okay, I like to call them gremlins, little things that just cause your computer to do bad things and you don't actually know why. All right, so the first one concept that I want to talk to you about, and is a line chart that we have in front of us here, but with a feature that isn't natively available to it. With the addition of the one of the later releases, there is a way to add data points to a line chart, meaning they're just dots that show the individual actual points of data to help give you a better sense of reference. But you can't natively conditionally format them in the line chart itself. So let me show you what I mean. We actually zoom in. There we go. You come over, you go to data colors. Notice that the little f of x symbol that typically allows you to, conditionally format something in the line chart isn't actually available in here. There's no option to apply any kind of dynamic conditional formatting. Personally, it's one of my favorite features of Power BI, the ability to format the background color, the font color, even the shadow color, all these things that you can kind of create KPIs out of to help further identify highs and lows, just really draw the eye as usually with color to areas of interest in your data. So line chart does not have that natively. I ended up stumbling across this accidentally through actually a feature that I really like about Power BI, which is that you can easily swap between visuals. So it's a great way if you're actually putting data in and you want to see what does a stat column chart look versus a clustered. And so years ago, I was actually just developing just a regular clustered column chart, hard to say that 5 times fast. And I had already applied conditional formatting to it, and I ended up changing it to a line chart, and those dots showed up. And it was one of those, is this a bug or is this a feature? And so in this one, you can see the f of x symbol is here. If I open that up and just let that pop up for a second, just standard formatting that I had applied to a different visual that actually allowed me to apply it. And then the tool itself basically passed that over to the line chart and made them appear as dots. Now, I will say that whenever you kind of just stumble across one of these things that, hey, interesting, this seems like a kind of an odd hidden feature, or maybe even like a bug, quote unquote, I would be wary of, deploying it to production, because bugs get fixed and you don't want to obviously give a client something that might actually change in the future. So in this case, I actually did check with Microsoft, and they said like, no, that's something, it's not really like a feature that we like announce or make very clear, but we're not going to actually get rid of it. Enough people have used it now, and we're just going to leave that in. So that's something that it's a safe feature to include, but it gets basically transferred over. So if you apply conditional formatting on a clustered or stacked column chart and then change it to a line chart, that logic will stay in there and those icons will stay in there. Granted, if you ever need to like update the conditional formatting, you do have to change it back to the other visual, do it. So there's a couple steps to syncing it if you ever need to. But once it's been set up and you publish it and the refresh is going, this will stay and it will continue to work as expected for the exact outcome that you see here. So it's kind of a nifty little trick to A, get some dots to show up, and B, actually conditionally format those dots on a line chart itself. One of my the happy accidents that I stumbled across when I was developing in Power BI. All right, a couple of other ones that I want to point out too. So within this as well, not necessarily directly related to the line chart, but just to visuals in general. One of my personal favorite features that came out actually about almost exactly a year ago, I think in the June release. This is how much I know Power BI. The June release of 2019 was the inclusion of something called the visual header tooltips. And that is actually a beautiful feature that has been something that I've done myself for years. I've used images and bookmarks and a bunch of much more difficult methods to get little tooltips to pop up for users to have like helper text. And for those of you who work with bookmarks, you know that can be very, very time consuming to create an update, especially if you have dozens of them all over the page. So the inclusion of just helper text that can be built into a visual is super useful. However, there are some limitations to it, especially around the fact that you can only have a 250 character limit. But of course, with a lot of developers, myself included, when I hit a limitation, I try to figure out how can I get around it? What possible options are there to, in this case, increase the character limit? You might be able to tell just from looking at the random text generator that I have in here. This is clearly more than just 250 characters. It's a lot longer than that. So this was one solution that I found to create a text box that has more characters than the default limit. So let me first show you if you're unfamiliar with it. I will say that this option for visual header tooltips is kind of buried in Power BI. I don't think it's in the best location. You first have to go down to visual header itself. Let me expand this out. So this separate section will not actually show up until you come to visual header. Open that up. You got to scroll all the way down. There we go. And you have to turn this on. So honestly, I don't know why this is buried in the submenu. I think this should simply be right over here on the right. Just have this menu always there and have the toggle next to it on and off. Everything else does that in here. So to me, the fact that you have to first find it in the submenu at the very bottom. So many people have not known this exists for the fact that who's going to go through and scroll through every menu and find every single thing. I'm one of the exceptions that does do that just to see what's available, but a lot of people will miss it that way. So you have to turn it on here first. And then secondly, you actually get the regular menu to customize it. So like I was saying, by default, your tooltip text, if you're not using a report page, I'm just using standard, you get 250 characters in there. There's no rich text. You don't get a format, character turn, underline, anything like that. You just have the standard text that shows up and looks like that. However, though, you are allowed to attach a report page to it. So you can actually create a hidden report tooltip page. For those of you who've made those before, it's typically used to create a mini report for the visual when you're hovering over a filter object or an object that has a filter in it within any of the elements of the chart. But you can also do that now for this little icon up here. And that's what I did with a info tooltip page. I just created a report tooltip page, basically shaped and formatted it to look like just a standard text box. And then I just inserted a text box in here. But the nice thing with this too is if you're actually using text in here, now you can format it. You can even add images. You can make a very rich information tooltip box in here and then do a lot more formatting with it. And now you can make it as tall and make it as wide as you want. The downside is, for each unique tooltip box that you want, you do need a hidden page for that. But the development expense isn't that high. And, with all of these hidden, yes, you might have a lot of tabs or sheets for the Excel users, like you like to call them that, in this report. And but I would say it's a very small downside to the fact that you now have a lot more flexibility and customizability. I've even recently made a couple of videos where I've showed you how to embed icons and other stuff to actually make a very rich visual header tooltip page. That's one of my favorite things that kind of, again, a nice workaround for something that I've included where you hit a limit, you're able to find different avenues to expand upon that within Power BI. All right, those are the two primary things that I wanted to show just for this first kind of tip and trick, is showing you the conditional formatting, then also showing you some really unique ways to also, I think there's somebody who's not on mute at the moment. A little bit of background noise. Ow, sorry, got to turn down my volume. Okay. And then the other one is the visual header tooltip. But both of those, I think, have very useful additions that you don't necessarily know intuitively, but you can now have additional ways to expand upon them. I do want to leave this spot open for a question for a couple of minutes if there are any in the chat window. Otherwise, I'll switch to the second exercise.
I don't think there's any questions yet.
Okay, cool. All right, let me zoom in. So this one, like a lot of these, I'd say I actually get ideas through a mixture of client calls, development projects, and then sometimes actually occasionally I'll get a student in a class who triggers an idea, which is really fun. But this came from a project that I was working on a couple of years ago when I started to build out some website data from Google Analytics, and they actually had this in their dashboard that's on the actual Google Analytics website, where they had this really cool heat map that was by day of week and hour of day. And I love the distribution of data and just the obviously the color heat map that's built into it, where it's like, okay, this is actually really great. It helps to show clustering and just what days and hours do people, in this case website traffic, where do they fall in as the highest and the least. And I just really like the concept. And this is actually a great example of scenarios where with custom visuals, I'll say just to start, it's one of the best features of Power BI, the ability to have, when you need it. I want to emphasize that a lot, when you need it. Custom visuals are great to help to solve business problems and provide visuals that support some objective or some type of data that maybe cannot be hit by a native visual. However, I'm also very careful to use too many of them because they are, to give you a 15-second, maybe 30-second summary, they're essentially sandboxed. So as far as for some security reasons and to prevent, data leakage and stuff. So they're loaded and processed basically a little bit slower. They've gotten faster than they used to be, but they'll always be slightly slower to load and to render on the page when loading them in a report in Power BI once you publish it. So regardless of how perfect the code is for a custom visual, they'll always take a little bit longer to load. Granted, you have 15 of them on a page, you're going to run into some performance issues versus 15 native visuals. So I use them, but only when absolutely necessary. I often will try to explore and say, hey, can I do this thing with a native visual? Okay, well, one doesn't do it. Can I layer them? Can I combine multiple visuals to create the effect that I'm looking for? And that's what I did here. I ended up using a matrix table to create this. There is actually a heat map custom visual in the AppSource visual store now, but that was one that I used. It didn't have as many features as I wanted. And then, all right, well, it's technically a table. Can I use conditional formatting? And that's what I actually did with this. It's just a table with a bit of formatting magic applied to it. And it's one way you can actually layer a couple of things in here to get the effect. So just to start with, I will go ahead and just apply some background color. There we go. All right. And I don't really like red and green because that's usually positive and negative. I want just like a lighter blue to let's just do something like a dark purple. There we go. Light to dark at least indicates smaller and higher quantities. So we at least got the background color in there, but there isn't an option anywhere in here. Like if I looked for label, things always run slower when I'm sharing my screen. Come on. There you go. Yeah, there's no turn off data labels. There's no checkbox that says turn this off. So that was kind of my first is like, all right, well, I like the heat map distribution, but it's too noisy for me to have the labels showing. I would rather just have the color and I can get the numbers if I hover. So without that actually being available, years ago when I was building this, just like kind of in Excel, you can actually layer multiple conditional formatting options. So you can actually apply more than one to a single value. In theory, you could apply all of them, though I think it would look pretty garish if you had background font, data bar, and icons in there. But if we apply the same logic to the font as the background, it essentially turns off the data label for us because they're always going to match perfectly. So same logic being applied here. Blue, purple, there we go. We've essentially turned off the data label. We have uncluttered and denoised the visualization itself. We can still get the data label if we need to by hovering. And now we have a much cleaner interface. And again, the goal of this is really, phase one is just to allow the eyes to be drawn to the clustering of colors that we see on the page. Very simple technique for this. But what I love about this demonstration is it really shows the power of the matrix table. The matrix table can be used for so many things. I've actually even seen recently, I think it was Phil Seamark. It might have been somebody else, but somebody actually used the matrix table to create a row of cards where each cell was expanded. They made the font size really big, and they basically turned it into a multi-row set of cards for a scenario that previously had used 5 different visuals, which would have loaded slower. So there's tons of ways to customize the matrix table. In many ways, to use it as a visual, to use it as a way to create like a series of values, all sorts of things. That can expand way beyond just using it as a standard table. So, consider the matrix table as a very powerful visual and something that can do a lot of things. Also considering the fact that this has the highest number of, I would say, formatting points or formatting elements of any visual in here, which is one of the reasons that search bar is so handy. So there's a ton of things you can do to customize this and kind of think out of the box, so to speak. But this is a quick and straightforward one, but it's just a clever use of how to create a visualization from a table within the native visual selection in Power BI. So are there any questions on this one? Not, I'll spin up the next one. Sounds like nothing, James?
No, sorry, I'm just having a scan through. I think there was a question about how you apply the conditional formatting again, but I think you covered that again anyway after that question.
Okay.
There was a question about where the 2021 data came from.
That must have been on the previous one.
Yeah, might have been. Sorry. And
Yeah,
then
yeah, all the data is just dummy for. So if there was 2021 data in there, that's just I usually when I build out a demo, I usually build it a year and a half in advance, so that way it doesn't get stale very quickly.
good one. I think that's it. I think you're good to go.
Okay, cool. This one comes from a very common client scenario that I get. I mean, for the number of people in the room, I would guess at least one person in here has probably wanted or needed a stack column chart with a total in Power BI. Of all the times that people want data labels, nobody almost ever wants a label, at least for a chart like this, on every single one of these. You can hover to get it, but if I turned on data labels for each single subtotal element, this would be inundated with a ton of noise and labels on the screen. More often than not, the clients just want a nice grand total here at the top, because without this, I can't actually get the total besides like, okay, well, this looks to be 600. Well, it's not actually 600, it's 602. And you don't want to have the client, okay, this plus this, and sit there and add everything together. Unfortunately, the actual column chart in here that we have, the stack column, does not natively include that. I always like to show the pain point before I actually show the solution. Like if we go over here, Format Painter, turn on data labels. Fortunately, it's not actually going to have any option to turn that on there, and there's no just easy toggle that says, total or show for subtotal, show for total. That's an idea that is on the Power BI Ideas website. It's one thing I'd recommend to vote on if you can, but it'd be really nice if there's just a little drop down in here that says data labels, show for subtotal and total, or maybe just show for total. Some option to allow you to select that, but not included. So of course, we are hit with a constraint, or at least I am. And all right, how do I solve this? Because the client is asking for this. It can't be built at the moment. So what are some workarounds for this? 2-3 years ago, I originally had a solution where I had layered two visuals on top of each other, and it worked perfectly. It did exactly what it needed to do. It was sized appropriately, and to the client experience, they didn't know it was two visualizations. But with anything in Power BI, the more visuals you have on the page, the slower the report's going to get. It's processing and having to render more stuff. So that was not the best solution. And then I actually had a training one day that I was giving and showing this, and somebody showed me a better solution to this, which is the one that you're going to see now. So it's a great example of when I can love to learn from somebody I'm actually instructing, and they can show me something cool that I hadn't thought of before, because everybody has something to contribute. So if we actually take this and convert it to a line and stacked column chart, there's going to be a way we can apply some clever formatting to this to get the result that we want. So we now have a line value option in here. I'm going to add page views to that. Okay, so like we can see where a data label might go for that, but we're not quite there yet. So I just need to do a bit of little formatting cleanup to get this even further along. So the thing that actually is the reason that I use this, and I never would have thought of this. To me, it's a bug, not a feature thing. So stroke width, as a designer, I would think minimum of 1, right? Like that's why would you ever need a 0 stroke width? But a student showed me, oh no, yeah, you can drop that down to 0. It's like, but why? Why would you ever need it at 0? And obviously, for my scenario, it works. It's a good solution for this. But it never would have even passed my brain to think of, oh, I can get the line to disappear. I would have thought, okay, make the line white, or see if I can change the line color to a transparent. But I never would have thought of actually getting the line to disappear based on its width. That's something you can actually set up. So we can get the line to disappear, and now we can go to data labels. We can turn those on, and then what we want to do is a couple of things. So you can see that right now the labels are only showing up in here for the line value. However, if I actually expand this out, the data labels are technically showing for everything. Now, you might want this, you might not. Personally, in an expanded view, I don't want this many data labels to show, so we do want to make sure that that's fixed and accounted for. I'm not going to do every one, because that's just it's a lot of rinsing and repeating. But what you can do then is you can go to Customize Series, And then the recommendation is that for all the elements that are the subtotal, in this case, it's my day of week, you turn the data label off for everything except for page views. So it's just making sure that the essentially the hide is toggled. And again, I'm not going to do it for all of them, but that would be the method to do it. And then for the page views down here at the bottom, we want the position to be set to above. Okay, now we're getting closer. It's starting to actually sit on the top of these. And the other thing I want to do, I want to turn off, show background. There we go. We're getting that nice, perfectly stacked value on the top of all of this. And then a couple of the things you can do to format if you really wanted. One thing that I've liked to do is I will come over to the shapes over here. And if you want to kind of link this down to a little item down here, you can do one of two things. I would say as kind of a final polish to this. You can either color this white and name this like a dot or something like that. And what I mean is you can rename line views to, if you want to basically just hide this completely, you can't have it be empty, but you can change it to a dot and then change that color to white to get rid of it. Otherwise, my other recommendation is if you want to kind of link the two items together, if you turn on show marker, that purple is showing up here. There's the purple legend at the bottom, and then you can just call that, say, grand total or total amount, or whatever terminology works for you. And that way, for those individuals, it links to the fact that this equals to this. So either of those options can work. I typically default to I color the actual thing in here using like a white. I turn off the marker, and then the only artifact you have showing is there will be like a little random single period dot in there, because again, you can't have this completely empty. That's the smallest character you can include, so it almost makes it invisible as part of the legend at the bottom. Or you can provide that more clear linkage between the two of them. But now this will work with filtering. The value will never stray from the top of that because it's always going to equal the grand total of that. So it's a solution that works perfectly once delivered in the Power BI service. All right. Any questions on this one?
Lots of people loving it, but I don't think there's any questions.
Cool. Questions just means we'll get more demos. And I'll have you time check me too, James. So I'll usually stop at about, let's say about 9:50, just to be safe, and leave room for links and questions at the end. So I'd say if you can, just time check me at like 9:45. Yeah, because I have my taskbar hidden, so I usually don't have the clock in front of me. Cool.
Yeah, you've got another 10 or 15 minutes then before.
Oh yeah, I see 9:33. Let me just clear up a little bit of. Get myself back a few gigs of memory. And this one. Here we go. All right. This one I actually created for a client that needed this earlier this year. I love it when, I could actually have a paid development project that I get to add like extra tools to my set. It feels like it's an extra win. But there's a development project that I needed, and a client very specifically wanted a button at the top of the page that allowed them lock these objects to be able to, go from quarter, day, month. They wanted a button that just toggled all the visuals on the page between these perspectives. And like, all right, well, like there isn't an easy way to do this with a slicer. I mean, there are some complex ways to potentially do this, but for the most part, there's you can't have a slicer selection that changes the hierarchy levels. But this is actually something that can be toggled with bookmarks. I think it's a less commonly used option in bookmarks, but for those less familiar, just to give you a quick recap of what bookmarks can capture. You have data, display, and current page. So it's basically, it is, what filters, what sort states, and it doesn't actually, it says drill in here. I wish you would also mention hierarchy, because when I think of drill, I think of drilling in and filtering, but it actually captures the hierarchy levels. So it is actually one of the states, one of the things that is captured as part of this state. And then display, obviously, is just or maybe less obviously, is whether or not it's showing or not, and then current page. But I think a lot of people don't realize that the data section, which usually I think of as slicer selections, filters, things like that, it is actually the level as well of this, whether or not you just not drilled, but just simply navigated from a higher level to a lower one. So you can actually create a bookmark that will allow you to travel back and forth between, in this case, in my hierarchies on each visual, the quarter, the month, or the day. So I'm just going to quickly go ahead and just show you how to create one of these and a couple of best practices that I recommend with bookmarks. But it allows you to create that one-click experience for users rather than having them needing to go, click over here and then click over there, like, 4 different clicks to get the same objective. And that's one thing that I have as a goal with most of my reporting is 2 things that I like to minimize if I can. Well, 3 technically. Eye travel. So your report, just as a quick tip, it should be organized in a way that your eyes kind of naturally follow a left to right path. You shouldn't be ping-ponging around to get the information as they're going through a journey of trying to come up to some decision. Same thing with the mouse. The mouse shouldn't have to bounce around the page. It should follow the eyes pretty easily, and both of them should have minimized movement. Last thing is clicks. That happens naturally with the first 2. But all those things, the less eye and mouse movement you have and the less clicks you do, the faster they can get to a conclusion. As much as I would like to think that they just stare at my report and appreciate all the nuances and the aesthetics that I include into it, they usually want to just get to a result and move on with their day. So this is one way to help reduce those clicks. So let's go ahead and just say that I wanted to create a month view. So I'll do quarter just because I want to actually set up the selection. So to start with, I'm going to put all my visuals up to the quarter level. There we go. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Very important. I'm going to make sure my selection pane is open. And in this case, I have 4 visuals that I want to select together. I have these already grouped, but I could open this up, and here's the 4 visuals that I care about. So I'm going to select 1, 2, 3, and 4. And one thing that I want to show you that's kind of a little clever thing that I do with these things here at the top. So this is something I won't go into how I made the buttons, but essentially what I have, just to give you a quick little recap, is I actually have 2 versions of each of these buttons on the page. I have a dark and a light version. That way, when I click them, it actually looks like it's actively selected because it helps to show current active selection. So each one of these, if I was to actually just toggle them for a second, you'll notice that there is a dark and a light quarter, a dark and a light month. So to have my, without actually building the buttons, to make sure that my selection is at the current level, I want this quarter one to be the dark one turned on and the rest of them to be light. So when I click the quarter, the other ones are in light mode, the quarter one is in dark mode. So make sure that that dark's selected, the other one is hidden, and basically just reverse toggle. Oh, no, keep that one. Reverse toggle the day one. There we go. And now same thing, I want to make sure all of these are selected. And notice that I am selecting just the objects that are on the page that I care about toggling. This is important when I create the bookmark for a couple of reasons. One primary one, more specifically. So I'm going to click Add. Everything's set up. My quarter button has been toggled, and all of my visuals are now at the quarter level. And I've made an active selection of just the things that I care about updating on the page. And I'll click Add. There we go. And then in the actual bookmark selection or the bookmark options, I'm going to make sure that selective visuals or selected visuals is the one that's selected. 99% of the time when I build a bookmark, I almost, for a few exceptions, I almost never have all visuals selected. I typically will select the visuals that I care about and select this. This will help to ensure that when you use your bookmark, it doesn't accidentally update something else on the page, because maybe you had a filter selection that that was set at the time or something else. And it's very easy. Like I said at the beginning of this demonstration or this whole presentation, is that bookmarks are useful, but they are very finicky and can, because they capture so many things, it's easy to miss something as far as the capture state, or you don't realize it's accidentally resetting something you didn't want to. So very important when you make them. Most of the time, you're probably going to want to select the things you care about for that bookmark, and then have these selected visuals toggled here. So that's toggled. And then my other recommended practice is only have the states to update that you care about. I do care about data, because that is going to update the visuals to that level that I care about in the hierarchy. And the display is what's going to update the buttons to toggle the active versus inactive button. I don't actually care about current page, because that means if this bookmark was activated on a different page, it takes me back here. But I would never have this bookmark on another page. So just as the best practice and for learning, I just have that turned off because it's not needed. There you go. And then I'll just just say rename this as test. And you'll see that if I actually now zoom out, I'll switch from day, and then I'm going to go back to quarter. You'll see that it's now doing the effect that I want to. And you're able to create those buttons and the effects. And at the end of the day, the only thing that you have to do remaining is, of course, just with that individual button, just make sure that the action is, of course, assigned to that bookmark that you want it to. There's obviously a lot of other conversations that can happen around this, but rather than having this be a demo on the fundamentals of bookmarks, it's more of a clever way to use bookmarks, especially for like I said, I think a lot of people don't think of bookmarks as being able to capture states or hierarchy levels. So it's a kind of a less commonly used application of this. Any questions on this one?
There are some general questions, but not relating to specifically what you said. Do you know any good visuals for visualizing time series data? And then there's a question about color schemes, particularly for people with visual impairedness.
Both really good questions. I'll say earmark those, and I'll answer those after this last demo and then at the very end.
Cool.
Perfect. All right, close you down.
3 or 4 more minutes till 1:45.
Yep. Perfect. Just enough time, I think, for the last one. All right. This is actually one that I did just a few months ago. It's I think a great example of a way to layer visualizations and have some really clever out-of-box solutions for a couple of objects in Power BI. So what we have at the bottom is a series of cards. You can see, if I actually get the slicer, so there you go. You can see that they change depending on if the percentage is up or down for the month. We have various states that you can see the bar changes red to green depending on if the percentage is up or down month over month, and all these values are changing. The top value plus the little kind of KPI ticker that's at the bottom and a color gauge in the middle to format that. Now, there is no native visual that just has this in Power BI. This was I didn't come up with the idea of the visual. I had somebody on a team show me a mock-up of this. So like, we want a number, a bar, text, and like ticker information. So, I now am given the opportunity to go back to the Power BI sandbox and, okay, how do I build this? Is there a custom visual that does this? Nope, there was no native visual that did this either. Like, well, what can I layer to create this? And it took a little bit of time. And I think we have just enough time that I can actually show you the way I did this with 3 visuals and then how I eventually did this with 2 different visuals. So the original one that I built used 3 different visualizations, but as I've mentioned now multiple times in this presentation, the more visuals you have, the slower your report's going to be. So, 3 visuals for every visual on the page that I have. If I had 5 of these cards, that's 15 visuals that have to render to create 5 cards. So it's definitely not the ideal scenario. So initially, I'm just going to copy and paste this. But what this is, this was a single value card. Below that was a button. It was basically I just use a button which allows you to color the background color. I could have used a text box too, but I essentially had just a long rectangular object with some conditional formatting in there that changed that, and then I had another single value card at the bottom. And I just stacked them, and I was given the effect that you see, which was it delivers perfectly, and it did exactly what they wanted to. But of course, all right, well, how can I make this faster? Step 1, build it. Step 2, improve upon it. And I just didn't. I knew there was some way that I could reduce the number of unique visuals potentially out of this. So my workaround is the thing we have over here. Same thing. Instead, though, this is 2 visuals. I still have my button there at the top and a single value card at the bottom. And it might actually be a little better if I showed you this next to the fields pane, so you can actually see what these are. But yeah, you can see now this is just a button there at the top, has the title and everything. The title is actually the single value card value there. That's one of the clever tricks that came into this. And the bottom one's just pretty straightforward. There's just the title is that, and there's a measure being fed into the bottom here. I'll quickly show this one. This is kind of where I think most of the clever magic came in, is the button at the top. But the bottom one here, single value card, and then with DAX, one nice thing about it is you can concatenate a lot of values together. So, the goal of this demo isn't to show you the measure as much, but yeah, you can basically just, create a bunch of KPIs yourself. And that's approximately what I did. I had a percentage being returned here and formatted because it's all text that's being produced. My target, kind of an arrow, to have an arrow up or down, and then the concatenated string of text that you see there at the bottom. Basically you can customize it as much as needed to spit out the string of text that a customer would expect to see. But that's how you get the percentage, space, down arrow, and then static text, and then the little number there. But it's a really clever way to use a button. The button itself is just actually a regular button, but like I said, I've sized it to be thin and narrow. I can actually. Okay, there we go. It's like Control Z. Come on. Nope. There we go. So the background, or is it? One sec. There we go. The fill color in the button, which is this, that is the color in the background. That can be set with a lot of different things in Power BI. So we've only been able to do that this year for a lot of these states, but I love the fact that you can use conditional formatting, meaning I can set up a measure to return hex colors, and then I can funnel that into here. So the background isn't just always red. It looks at a value, and then based off of a rule that this window should pop up in a second. Come on. Wave my wand a couple of times. Amazing how much slower these things can get when you're presenting on Teams, if it actually shows up. Or are you just going to get stuck? This actually might be like the 1 times in 1,000 when Power BI actually freezes. Do that. I think it actually did. You guys actually get to witness a rare event. Power BI is insanely reliable as far as crashing, at least for me. And this is one of the few times that I think it actually might have frozen. Normally I should have gotten a little conditional formatting window that pops up right there. So I'll just load that one more time. But yeah, I was saying, as far as the conditional formatting goes, there's a lot of elements in there as far as the background, the border color, the shadow, all of these things that can be set with conditional formatting to change dynamically based on whatever set of conditions that I have, rule logic as far as that goes. Let me just quickly open this back up. This one, there we go. Beautiful. Over here. All right, let's see if this will actually open this time. There we go. Okay, so field value, as you can see, it's formatting by a measure that I built, which is in this case just the KPI colors. And if we look at the measure, which is open KPI colors here, let's get rid of this. There we go. This is actually pretty simple. You can, I basically check in as the variance, so greater than or equal to 0, return the green, return the green hex color. Otherwise, return the red hex color. These rules can be as simple or as complex as you want it, but that's essentially what I'm doing in here. Is I'm just using a measure to say, to tell the background color what it wants to be. Now, the last final trick to this, though, is besides using a button just as a color gauge, is the title. So again, I didn't want to have 3 visuals. I didn't want a single value card, bar gauge, and the bottom piece. So it's like, all right, well, how can I somehow combine these? All right, well, I can have a title for the button, but unfortunately, the title, it does allow for measures to be included into this, for a dynamic title, but it has to be a text value. Otherwise, I can only do standard flat non-dynamic text in there. So you can come in and specify a measure that's returning a text output into this. So in this case, I do have a title in there. Call that completed text. Nope. It was whichever one the title was. One sec. I'll just Control Z a couple of times. And one more time. There we go. Okay. And the thing in here for any of these titles that are being included, the trick is you actually have to format it as text, because you can't just have the open amount being returned into there. If I just had some of the value in there, it wouldn't actually let me supply it into there. So you have to wrap it in a format string, which then takes the number, converts it to text. It looks like a number, it smells like a number, but it is in fact a text output. I did run some performance tests. There's essentially no performance cost to using the format option on it. All the heavy lifting is being done in the calculation. The format is, thousands of a second, even if not even smaller than that. Basically, no cost. The one downside is you need to have a dedicated measure just to go into the title of the visual. But you can now basically create a card at the top in the title of the numerical or date or whatever output that you want, as long as you format it to output to an actual text value. So that was the way I was able to take 3 visuals, combine it down into 2, because about 6 to 8 months ago, Microsoft, actually maybe a year ago now, Microsoft allowed us to start using measures to return text to then funnel into the actual title field of a calculation. So we've now taken a button, which is designed for bookmarks, and turned it into a gauge and card that's sitting at the top of a single value card. So we can create a very custom visual, but this just shows you a way to use 2 out-of-box objects in Power BI to create a very unique output for a customer for certain business requirements. So I think a lot of these really just help show the clever ways to use elements in Power BI, combining them, layering them, formatting them, and customizing them to really hit a lot of business needs and business requirements that don't necessarily aren't necessarily supported in that sense out of the box, but there's a lot of clever ways to build this stuff together. So any questions on this one? I think we're just about for time. So
I don't think there's a specific question on this one, although somebody's got their hand up. Hamad, do you want to take yourself off mute and ask your question?
I'll have this up while we're answering questions too.
Cool. No, maybe not. Okay. Has anybody else got any further questions? Feel free to take yourself off mute and
I'll just do a quick. I'll just also do a quick recap of the slide here. So before we finish with the questions, a couple of links here that are code on the left will take you to my website, and as well as there's some friendly links for the presentation PDF that I had. Not many of those in there, but the option there at the top will also provide this document, which will have references and links to a lot of the videos that I have as one of the last slides that are in this document. So that's a really good link for you at the very top. Consulting services and a lot of the stuff that I also build in Power BI. I make a ton of files and templates, Google Analytics. I have some Uber reports, a lot of like plug and play stuff and calendar tables. So lots of useful things in there. One thing I do provide is just a discount code for anything that I have on my website for people for 30 days. So if you find anything useful or want to engage in anything with me, you're welcome to use that code between now and 30 days from now. I will recommend too, if you like the content and you just want to learn more about cool stuff in Power BI, the YouTube channel at the bottom. I do a video every Tuesday, 5 to 10 minute snack size videos and all sorts of cool stuff in Power BI. And then if I don't get to answer any questions from you, or if you just have questions in the future about anything related to Power BI, you're welcome to hit me up on LinkedIn as well at the link at the bottom. And then I'll also, like I said, just I'll leave the last few minutes here open for questions and comments and anything else.
I do have a question.
Sure.
How did you sort the hours in the line chart?
Yeah, so then I typically just have another column if necessary that I had hours formatted, and then I had hours as a number, so like 1 through 24, and I just sorted column A by column B using the sort by column option in Power BI. Right. Similar like how you would sort like months on a calendar table. You'd sort the month name by month number.
Right, thank you.
Yep.
Hi, Reid. I have a question.
Sure.
So we've got a line chart visual, which we put the value is actually a dynamic measure. So we have a small disconnected table that has a list of all the different measures that the user might want to see. So it might be total value, gross profit, etc. And as they select the different slicer, it changes the measure that's shown in the line chart. That all works really well. However, we've got a problem where we now want to show a measure that one of the values wants to be a percentage. And so we're essentially going to have one value that returns a numeric, like a pound note, and another then returns a percentage. But when we do the percentage, it doesn't display. Now, my understanding is that that measure has to have a format, and that the format is being first set at numeric. But then when we want to show it as a percentage with a percentage sign, we can't do that. Do you know of a way of doing that? I've tried in the DAX to change the format. So I said, if the user selected option measure 3, then formats as percentage, but that it then just stops it from being displayed completely.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're throwing it on a table, format changes it to text, so that can't be summed. So you can't show that on a column chart. There are some ways in tables to use like the new calculation groups that just came out, like with some of the advanced editor tools to do that in like grids. But on an actual like visual where it's where it has to sum it or anything else, it's a bit trickier to be able to have one element show one type of format and another show a different type. It's like you said, it's almost kind of mirrored of a one-to-one type formatting type without, maybe looking at it a bit more and wanting into some other options. But it's not an easy thing to do. And from most of these situations, it probably wouldn't work to be able to show like both.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Yep.
I've actually got another question, but that's there was a popular custom visual called Image by Cloudscope that allowed us to put images onto the page where we could then drag in an image URL. So it's really good if we drill down to say product page and we wanted to show images of our products. We could have like image 1, image 2, image 3. Cloudscope have actually decided to remove that visual, and all of a sudden we're a bit worried that once we've got these reports out there that show these product images, that we're going to lose that ability. Do you know of any other visual where you can display an image URL, or does anyone else?
There's a couple of ones. Yeah, go ahead, James.
No, you go, Reid. You talk while I find the link.
Yeah, no, I don't know the names off the top of my head. I just know that there are. I thought of like 2 or 3 different things that can, basically just it renders a URL image.
So I think the issue is that Power BI have decided that you're not allowed to display external data into a visual. So, James, what was it you were going to put in?
Yeah, so you're right. So Cloudscape removed the visual because they changed the rules around, or tightened up on the rules anyway about linking to external ones. Now, I've temporarily forgotten his name, but the guy who created the violin chart visual has created a much more powerful image, or it's HTML viewer actually, but it works for images too, visual. I'll dig out the link. It's not on AppSource yet. I think he submitted it, but it is available to download on GitHub. So I will find the link and put it in the chat.
Just a quick 10-second thing. The last thing I just wanted to give you is a link. So the blog sign-up raffle that's in front of us here, what that will do is they put your name into a hat, whether or not you are a newer or existing blog subscriber to me, and the winner gets drawn out, just basically their name, and you get an hour of consulting with me as like a Zoom or Teams call. So it's just kind of a way to help people on my blog, and then as a return, you get a chance to basically pick my brain for an hour on Power BI. Just to put that last link up there. Was there any other questions though that I can help answer?
Well, I think we're about 30 seconds away from the community call, so let's call it a day there. Thanks very much, Reid. That was a fantastic session. Some really great tips there.
Yeah.
I should look forward to using some of those myself.
And whenever you want me back, I got one other presentation I'm still demoing at the moment, and I'm actually in the process of building a new one for the PASS Summit, virtual PASS Summit this year. So I'll actually have a third pretty cool new topic on enhancing report design here coming up soon.
Great, thanks, Reid, and thanks everyone for joining. And I look forward to seeing you next month. And Reid, hopefully we'll have you back sometime in the near future.
Yeah, again, thanks for having me, and have a good evening for you guys.